The report is in: obstruction of justice, impeachment, and a Decision 2020 update on this episode of The Uprising.
LibertyNation.com. They are the resistance, but we are the uprising. With Scott Cosenza and Tim Donner.
There's not going to be a President Donald Trump.
Hey, a president. Can you believe it?
I love the poorly educated.
The voters have guaranteed themselves slavery, economic disaster.
I can't believe I'm losing to this guy.
You could put half of Trump's supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables.
I have never met with Russians.
Our elected representatives can abuse subordinates and then secretly use a slush fund of our money to pay them off.
Black Lives Matter, the Antifa movement, is interested in preserving the fabric of America.
Tim, let's just roll right into it. I want to know, and I want everybody else to know an exact estimate of how many pages of the Mueller report you yourself read.
I love how you put me on the spot right from the start.
Yes.
And you always say at the beginning, let's not rehearse these podcasts. I want to be spontaneous so that you could hit me with a gotcha question like that. I'm going to remember that.
Immediate former co-host of the Uprising podcast.
You
Tim,
love that immediate former thing.
Joining us for the full episode, once again, this episode of the Uprising. And thank you, Tim, for joining us, and thank everybody else for listening. But I do want to know the answer to your question. I'm somewhat obsessed by these people who start talking about it. As you well know, as I said to you earlier today, as soon as the report came out, I hit print on my printer, and about roughly halfway through the 500 or so pages, it quit on toner, and I had to run out to get the rest of it.
A likely excuse.
The rest of it printed, because I'm old enough that I can't exist in that all digital environment with the document. I need to kind of shuffle back and forth and highlight and things like that. But no, for real. Did you read?
I read some of Volume 1 and most of Volume 2 is what I'll say, because it wasn't 100% of either.
Yeah. So about 200 and some odd pages for each volume. Volume 1 was laying out all the evidence against the people who were prosecuted, I would say. And Volume 2 was exclusively about obstruction of justice and the president. I think I read half a dozen pages of Volume 1, maybe a dozen, and at least 100 pages of Volume 2, and maybe significantly more than that. The important ones I read, Tim. Let's just say that. I don't think I read all 20 pages of the goings on about the Michael Flynn matter, for instance, and we'll get into some more of that as we go. But we both wrote about this report for LibertyNation.com. We both wrote about the 10 episodes that we learned about from General Barr's prebuttal, which was a new word for me that I.
That's good. I like that.
Yeah, this was derisively applied to his press conference by some people on the left. The idea that, before the bad news comes out, you're sort of laying the groundwork. Right,
serving as his assigned function as flack for the Trump administration.
It's so hilarious. Yeah. All right, we're going to get into that, too. Yeah. Oh, boy. Yeah, that reaction is, in fact, why not just go ahead and let's play some of the reaction right now.
Bill Barr has decided his legacy, he is fine with his legacy being the AG who took one for the team.
It was an extraordinary political commercial for the president.
A real black mark on his long and previously distinguished career.
He blew it.
He said precisely, Jake, what the president of the United States wanted to hear: no collusion.
Is this something that we are supposed to see from the Attorney General of the United States, not the Attorney General of the President of the United States? Of course not.
Those are prefabricated talking points. I mean, they had those written before. They just filled in the blanks of what their objections would be.
I think I submitted a 1,500-word piece this morning at 1:30 a.m. on the Mueller report, and I had at least 150 words prefabricated in that story. I identified the names and the parties. Yes, but not the reaction. No, well, I wanted to say this. The idea that the AG is a lackey for Trump.
Yeah.
This in the world of... So attorney generals are notoriously criticized for being lackeys for their presidents. In fact, some might argue that's their job, is to dive on a grenade for the president.
I would respond to the charge that Barr is a lackey for Donald Trump by saying any more than Eric Holder or Loretta Lynch were for Barack Obama.
Yeah, but I would say to you, the idea that, yes, AGs are protectors of the president. But I just think it's funny the play that this is a particularly egregious, when in fact I think the opposite is true. And I'm not a fan of General Barr necessarily, or even President Trump necessarily. But the idea that this guy is somehow even on remotely in the same league as Eric Holder, Tim, Barack Obama's attorney general, who got famous for basically jumping on a grenade for Bill Clinton. He jumped on the Mark Rich pardon grenade.
Right.
Or excuse me, was it the Andrea Rich pardon grenade? Whichever one bought a pardon from
Mark Rich.
Oh, it was Mark.
Yes,
okay.
Mark Rich. And Eric Holder. Okay, I recall that he was not condemned the way he should have been for refusing to take action on the actions of the IRS in shutting down conservative organizations, stripping them of their exemptions and putting them through the ropes in a case that wound up being settled for over $3 million, and we got a slice of that at one generation away. But I don't recall
we're the victims. You can't just brush by it, Tim. We're the victim survivors of an attempt by the federal government to frustrate our constitutionally protected rights to express ourselves because of the content of our views. And this, I think,
but my point is, you're
right. My soapbox. Go ahead, make your point.
because I think you made yours. Is that I don't recall the right broadly condemning Eric Holder as corrupt because he refused to take action against an obvious use of the most powerful agency of the American government to target Americans for their political viewpoints. I don't recall anybody from the right. Maybe a few people here and there, but this is a broad-scale condemnation calling William Barr a corrupt attorney general. This is what they're calling him, corrupt.
Where is the corruption exists in the same place as the Moscow files of Donald Trump's collusion with Russian agents. That's where it exists. Where's the corruption? So let's talk a little bit in earnest about Volume 2 of the report. Volume 2 of the report, I think the big takeaway for me, the first big takeaway for me is Mueller says, I started this job knowing I was not going to make a decision on whether Donald Trump obstructed justice because of a Justice Department guideline from 2000, going all the way back before Eric Holder's Justice Department to Janet Reno's Justice Department. And we have a Assistant Attorney General for Janet Reno who gave her a memo which has the force of sort of like an internal law. We've talked before on the on the podcast a number of times about the Cole memo.
Right.
Which is a rule that governs how U.S. attorneys will prosecute marijuana cases. Same idea. This is a law. They don't just get to go decide to prosecute who they like if they get that job. There is
and the rule isn't optional.
Right. It's not an optional rule. So it's a memorandum establishing a rule that's mandatory within the Justice Department.
Right.
And that's what this rule is. And the rule is that you can't prosecute a sitting president because it's unconstitutional to do so. That's the Justice Department rule. That's where Mueller starts with this report. And then he goes in and he spends, what did you call it, the 10 gifts that...
The lovely parting gift.
Yes, the 10 parting
Mueller
gifts
to Democrats.
that Mueller gives to Democrats. I called them, I think, the 10 stations on the roadmap to impeachment, the sort of train railway map,
yes,
if you will.
Yes.
He identifies 10 different things. Episodes is what Bob Barr called them in his pre-buttal. And those episodes include, like, firing James Comey, trying to get Jeff Sessions to have Mueller recuse himself, trying to get Jeff Sessions to do all sorts of things, trying to get Corey Lewandowski to get Jeff Sessions to do things. All these different acts. And that's the sort of roadmap that Democrats are hoping, I think, that they can then turn into enough sort of political will for an impeachment case. But there is no obstruction of justice case to be made on any of those points because of what Mueller himself says earlier in the report. He cannot do it.
Well, now, we're talking about the norms of behavior or activity or conduct in the Justice Department and among special counsel investigators, et cetera. But is it common? And I'm not gonna ask a leading question, Counselor. I'm going to say, is it common to provide this level of information on someone who is not recommended for indictment?
I think it's probably. I get where you're headed with that question, and I do think that. I'm trying to remember the name of the Wall Street Journal reporter, columnist woman who wrote a really good piece, basically discussing Mueller's report as a defense of the FBI, essentially, which I thought was pretty prescient. But I don't think I can say yes or no to your question, Tim, because it is so uncommon. The whole business of it is so uncommon to even start an investigation knowing that you can't bring a charge, in this instance, like he says, in the delivering of these reports. So, unfortunately, I don't think there's a good answer to your question. But I would say that as I read the report, it especially after having that sort of been pointed out to me, I do think that's what a lot of it boils down to. Robert Mueller is an FBI guy in his bones, and
yes,
he's writing a defense of the indefensible.
And by the way, Mueller and Barr are longtime friends.
Yeah,
I mean they're both fixtures in the swampocracy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I thought what was one of the things that was overlooked in all of this. Nobody talked about it because nobody basically talked about collusion yesterday. When the report came out, they were talking only about obstruction because collusion was a settled issue. But I think that the case against collusion and the absurdity of the allegation was magnified with the revelation in the Mueller report that the Russians tried to coerce the Trump campaign and Trump himself several times into colluding with them. And he rejected those attempts. That's different than saying they didn't attempt at all. What Mueller was saying is that they attempted to lure them into that kind of honey trap, and that the Trump campaign, the Trump operation, refused to do so. So I think that the not guilty on collusion was strengthened in this report, and nobody paid much attention to that because they were all focused on obstruction.
Not guilty is too. No, you're being too generous. It's not that there is no collusion. There's no guilt. There's zero. Not guilty is you couldn't get a unanimous verdict. That means not guilty. There's not a single person who could see collusion. Rachel Maddow isn't even talking about collusion anymore.
And there was no crime alleged, by the way, at the beginning of this special counsel investigation. He was empowered to be the special counsel without the allegation of a specific crime. And most people don't realize they thought it was a criminal investigation. It wasn't. It was a counterintelligence investigation. There's quite a distinction to be made there.
One of the one of the points that Mueller makes in the report, he gives Trump a little bit of sort of credit for the frustration of being a person who is improperly being investigated and, of course, knows it. And I thought that's where you were going with your statement. I want to play the clip. And this is Barr in the conference talking about the frustration of Trump leading to some of the actions, including perhaps firing Comey.
There is substantial evidence to show that the president was frustrated and angered by his sincere belief that the investigation was undermining his presidency, propelled by his political opponents, and fueled by illegal leaks. As he entered into office and sought to perform his responsibilities as president, federal agents and prosecutors were scrutinizing his conduct before and after taking office.
The point is, you have to fire Comey if he won't say that you're not under investigation. He knows you're not under an investigation, and it's in the air that you're under an investigation, and it's crippling your presidency, and he works for you. What the hell are you going to do?
Precisely.
I mean, it's so insubordinate. It's beyond the pale. That's what was happening. So just if people don't know, I know there's lots of sort of facts out there that get blown around. Go ahead. You want to?
Well, the point of these top 10 list, the lovely parting gift from Mueller to the Democrats, is that the things in there all relate to stuff that, in essence, wasn't ultimately done. There was no information delivered at the Trump Tower meeting, for example. And the idea of firing Mueller was considered by Trump. They said he made the decision and was overruled. If he was overruled against his will, he would have fired the guy. So if these decisions were reversed by his aides, who refused, using air quotes, they refused to do what the president ordered, unquote. If he did it ultimately against his will, the guy would have been fired. So what they're talking about here is almost like the thought police. They are
not almost,
trying to convict him of what he was thinking and pondering, but didn't decide. It's based on his thoughts, not his actions.
Yes.
That's how preposterous this list of. It's nothing more than legal hearsay, Scott. It's just legal hearsay.
Well, I think that we could get into some, if we want to go, and I don't want to, by the way, but if we go into a deep dive again on one or two of the 10, I think we could find potential obstruction of justice there if we were really looking to make a case. Now, whether that rises to an impeachable offense, again, in a trumped-up investigation, it's not like, but that was used without irony.
That's right.
It wasn't like the kind of an investigation where, and we've seen this happen before, and this often gets people in trouble, which is a Trump lieutenant, for instance. Like they're investigating Don Jr., and Trump doesn't really know if Don Jr. did something or didn't, so he tries to help him out. That's one thing. We're talking about Trump
editing an email.
Right. Trump,
he edited an email, and for that he gets obstruction of justice.
Not to submit to a judicial body, by the way.
Right.
We're talking about like Mueller talks about in terms of potential episodes of obstruction, having people lie about what he knew when he knew. Again, not to an investigative body, but to the press, to the media. Do we think that other presidents and their staff have told untruths to the media, and would they then be opened up for an obstruction charge? I mean, when Barack Obama said that you could keep your doctor if you liked your doctor, and we know that he knew that was a total lie to sell his Obamacare plan,
and he overturned the entire American healthcare system based on that lie.
Is that a prosecutable lie?
Should be, in my view. I mean, when you use well, I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to get into that.
Okay.
But here's the thing. Here's another thing about this, Scott, that I found in reading the report sort of collectively, looking at it, was how much of that information was already publicly available, had already been reported in one form or another. A high percentage of it was, oh, yeah, I remember reading about that. I remember hearing about that. I remember finding out that was true. But what people did before the report in the media and in the Democratic Party is they tried to connect dots that Robert Mueller was unable to connect between various meetings that happened in disparate places and times, and try to say there was some grand conspiracy behind it, when, by the way, some of the things that the left was talking about was Trump standing up at a rally and saying, hey, Russia, if you get the 30,000 Clinton emails, why don't you send them to me? Right. I'd appreciate that. Right. You're going to collude with a foreign nuclear power by publicly going on the stage and saying, in an obvious joking way, why don't you send them to me? Or, I think the media will appreciate the
material. It doesn't matter that it was an obvious joke to them. The fact that it was said, I was just, I read a story today that the New York Yankees are going to, or have already, put Kate Smith into the dustbin and her rendition of God Bless America because somebody complained, like one person complained that she sang a song with racist lyrics. And that's the reason why. Now, they're not saying that she was a racist. This is a woman who's a singer.
It doesn't matter.
And she sang a song.
Doesn't matter.
And then, by the way, you read deeper into the story, and you know who else recorded that song to great fame? I can't name the song right now. Paul Robeson, who, if you don't know who that is, it's a famous black activist and singer. And it's like, so are we going to tear his work down too because he sang the same song?
This is what it's come to.
Yeah. So the fact that it was a joke or said in jest in front of a rally of 20,000 people, no, that's just like it was passed in like a back alley message.
And by the way, even with the Trump Tower meeting. Okay, that was on the record. It was in his
Trump Tower.
It was in Trump Tower.
There's cameras everywhere monitoring who's going in and out of that building.
Like they're going to collude that way. And by the way, like if the similar offer had been made to Hillary Clinton to deliver dirt on Donald Trump, she would have said, no, these are Russians. We don't want
much.
I mean, come on.
No, it's too much.
Come on. I mean,
All
this is common sense.
Let's go ahead and just close out with a discussion of impeachment moving forward, because I think that's the next step. There is no, for people who don't know, there is no such thing as a congressional prosecution for obstruction of justice.
Right.
The Congress has one option if they want to exercise it, which is to put forth a bill of impeachment. And we know that a bunch of, well, we already know there's more than one probably already filed. So
yes.
What's going to happen with that? Put your political...
Al Green.
Since we've been together.
Not the singer, but the congressman. No, not the good one.
Right.
Has already filed impeachment charges. Others are lining up at the front door to get
when
their.
When AOC learns how to spell impeachment, she's going to.
Now, Scott, behave yourself. Impeachment is something that's going to be decided, because it is a political process, is going to be decided on a strictly political basis. And that is if the polls indicate that that's something that people want. I get the sense they're not going to go all the way to impeachment. I get the sense that they're going to take this issue and run with it rhetorically. They're going to go to the compliant media and start barking and screaming about these top 10 reasons that he might have obstructed justice.
Issue a lot of subpoenas.
Issue subpoenas, do investigations, call embarrassing witnesses for the president. I think they'll do.
And the most important thing, Tim, issue fundraising appeals to get him out of there for the next president.
Even more so now that we know he obstructed the American system of justice. They don't even need that, Scott, but they'll use it. I suspect they'll do that because I think they understand, Pelosi understands, certainly. The question is whether she can contain her left-wing fanatics like AOC. She understands that an impeachment proceeding is a riverboat gamble politically to do that in a country that is already well beyond fatigue at investigations, one after another. They elected them to do a job. And by the way, there's bipartisan issues they can work on, like infrastructure, for example, that they could actually be productive. Prescription drug prices. These are two issues that they agree on, but they'll never work together because the Democrats are. And I think the reason beyond that,
gave me a lot of hope. That's a really good outcome for me. Is nobody working together in the Congress to get anything done.
Well, I think you're going to get your wish, because they'll be single-minded, and here's ultimately why, Scott, because the Democrats realize that on the playing field of issues, they cannot win this upcoming election. They cannot win based on the economy, based on employment, jobs, consumer, business, confidence. They cannot win on issues. So the only
Mayor Pete's going to disagree with you on that. We'll get to him in a minute.
But I'm just going to say their only hope is to keep throwing enough dirt against the wall against Trump, hoping some of it will stick so they can go after him just based on his vile personality, because they cannot beat him, Scott, on his record.
Okay, so closing question, prediction. Do they bring a bill of impeachment to a vote on the floor of the House?
I would say no.
I think they will. I think they'll find it irresistible. I think that's. I hope you're right, by the way, and I don't mean it in that way that people are like, "Oh, I hope you're right."
Well,
but
I don't
really
mean and I don't mean that they don't want to, and that they aren't chomping at the bit to do it, but they want the White House.
Your meaning is that politically they will add it up and do the math and believe that it's not beneficial to them.
I agree,
and I hope you're right. I tend to think that won't be their calculus. They're just like the Harry Reid nuclear option on Supreme Court justices. I think they'll just see that red meat flash in front of them, and they've got all these crazies like AOC whispering in their ear. There's nobody I don't see anybody's whispering in AOC's ear.
No. Nobody's stopping her, Scott. There's
reasonable.
Nobody, not one Democrat that's willing to stand up and say, this is insane.
There's nothing scarier.
The Green New Deal is insane. Government-controlled health care is insane.
Yes. There's nothing scarier than these very young people who have not had much life under them, who think that they're going to be able to remake the world. It's like, honestly, I mean, I know I'm not suggesting she's the same thing, but it's sort of like I feel like the Khmer Rouge or like something like that. Well, you're just going to have to change or what, you know?
Or be eliminated.
Or your child army is going to eliminate. All right. Well, with that in mind, let's talk about, I think he's a millennial, Mayor Pete, Tim, I know. Yes. And we are going to get into, and I know really this is your principal reason for being on the podcast and maybe just being in life generally, as the uprising vice president, or excuse me, for immediate past Vice President Joe Biden for president correspondent. So we're going to get to him in a second. But I want to talk about Mayor Pete. I feel like we have neglected Mayor Pete on the uprising. We haven't really given him his due. I always thought when I first heard about him, obviously I was surprised that it was getting that much traction because he's a gay dude married to another guy. And I was, I just didn't think like, I guess maybe America is ready for that. But also that he was mayor of Indianapolis. And no, he's not mayor of Indianapolis, Tim. That's too big a city for where he's mayor. He's mayor of South Bend,
Indiana, home of Notre Dame University.
And I just thought, how is this possible that this guy's getting this much traction? And it's funny. Just before the podcast today, when I was waiting for you, I looked up. I'm like, how many people have ever voted in one election for this guy? They think they're acting like. Oh, and let me just add this. I'm sorry if you didn't get the memo. The media broke up with Beto over the past 10 days.
Yes, they did.
It was they're ghosting him now, as the kids say.
I mean, the flavor of the week is past. We got a new flavor
Mayor
of the
Pete
week.
Is the new flavor.
It's actually remarkable because you mentioned it. He's a gay dude married to another guy, and at the beginning that was a narrative because the left wanted to trumpet it, the right wanted to emphasize it, whatever. But I've been watching a lot of the coverage of him now, Scott, and they barely mention it in their coverage of it, including on Fox News.
Right.
So he appeared more than one time publicly and kissed his husband. Okay. And so it really shows you how far we've moved, that this guy's being seriously considered and also being spoken of highly by people who are sort of in the mainstream because he's kind of soft-spoken, seems kind of reasonable.
Oh, he's a Boy Scout.
Seems
kind
of
in more
moderate.
ways than one. He is. He's absolutely.
He's depicted that way.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm talking about. That's the image they're selling.
Right.
But what I wanted to say, Tim, was I looked up the numbers, and he won 8,515 votes.
It's a start, Scott. It's a start.
I mean, but that's not to make fun of somebody who serves as mayor of a medium-sized town. We need good people to be mayors of medium-sized towns. But the idea that that's a natural elevation point to go from the mayor of a 100,000 person town to president of the United States
at 37 years old.
And by the way, this is like to me the Stacey Abrams thing. If this guy wasn't gay and married to a dude, would we be hearing about him?
Maybe not. I mean, maybe that's been the thing that's accelerated him. But a lot of people on the right, I have heard say that, he's not such a bad guy. He's, he seems pretty reasonable and stuff. But we have a soundbite that kind of reveals that he's really, Scott, in the end, in terms of policy, which is what matters, he's not really very different than any of the other 17 Democratic presidential candidates.
Most Americans don't want the conservative agenda that we're now seeing, the extreme agenda that we're seeing in Washington. In fact, it is precisely for that reason that they have to interfere with democracy with things like voter suppression or clinging on an electoral college that overrules the will of the American people. It is precisely because the American people, by and large, don't want what they're selling.
Okay, how is that really very different than the rest of them?
So he's saying he opposes...
he wants to get rid of the Electoral College.
He wants to get rid of the Electoral College. And
all this talk about voter suppression.
Right. Can you give me where's the voter suppression?
Well, you don't have to give examples, Scott. It's a narrative. Narratives don't require examples. They don't require facts. They only require the narrative itself.
Of all the different, I don't know if it's political controversies is the right word or what, that just get get my goat in terms of being disingenuous. This voter suppression thing, Tim, to me, compared with the illegals that vote, because of the motor voter bill, which was signed into law by President Clinton, everybody who gets a driver's license in this country is allowed to register to vote they're not allowed to. They're required, the state is required by law to offer them the opportunity to register to vote when they get that driver's license. You don't have to have the same documentation to vote that you do to get a driver's license in many jurisdictions, California among them. So you can register to vote in California as an illegal. Now, there's supposed to be processes in place that double check that audit that kick those people off the rolls. And the argument from me and other people is that those processes either are not in place or are not functioning correctly. So we have a situation where there are so many people who vote who are not legally entitled to vote. And I just do not see where there are these massive suppression campaigns that are any real. We hear about them on election night. Somebody will sue, there's a long line or whatever. But then it just sort of drops away, right?
Yeah, nothing is ever done about it. And we know, you mentioned California, we know it to be true because at least one, and perhaps more, but at least one county in California registered more votes than there were registered voters in their district.
Happened in Philadelphia, in Barack Obama's, I think it was the second election.
It's the second election, yes.
More
yes.
Yeah.
More votes than there were registered voters. So we know there's voter fraud, but that's not the issue. The issue is voter suppression and the fact of using laws where you have to actually prove that you are who you say you are, which by itself is hardly sufficient to stop exactly what you talked about, because you have illegals getting driver's licenses so they can identify themselves. So even voter ID laws hardly stop illegal voting.
I was a poll watcher in 1999. Was the first year I ever kind of volunteered for that process, be a part of the election process. And the manager of that particular polling place ejected me from the polls because he challenged my poll watcher certificate. There was like a comma or a period or something out of place. And he rejected the idea that there should be any kind of sunshine in that area. Like, why was he scrutinizing the form for that? Well, anyway, it turns out, and I didn't generate that document. By the way, it was given to me by the Board of Elections. The judge of elections admonished him for that. But it was, of course, after the election, right? So the damage is already done. I just see that. Well, I could go off probably in too deep a hole for that, but I want to talk about what I saw Buttigieg or heard Buttigieg say that Buttigieg. That's what Andrew Sullivan said wrote about how to pronounce his name. Booty, like he's a judge in a booty judging competition.
Okay, booty judge. I can ride with that.
This is what he said that just kind of. To say that it disqualifies him for my vote is an understatement. This is Mayor Pete on the Rachel Maddow show.
Okay.
I'm really glad I did get the chance to serve. It helped me connect with very different Americans, people, especially when I was deployed to Afghanistan, who I had almost nothing in common with. Different politics, different generation, different racially, different regionally, but you learn to trust each other with your life because that's what the job requires. And I want more Americans to have that, but I don't want you to have to go to war to get it. It's one of the reasons I think national service will hopefully become one of the themes of the 2020 campaign, because we really want to talk about the threat to social cohesion that helps characterize this presidency, but also just this era. And one thing we could do that would help change that would be to make it, if not legally obligatory, then certainly a social norm that anybody after they're 18 spends a year in national service, so that afterwards, whether it's civilian or military, it's the first question on your college application if you're applying for college, or it's the first question when you're being interviewed for a job if you're going right into the workforce. Now, to do that, we're going to have to create more service year opportunities, and we're going to have to find a way to fund it. But I think it's worth approaching.
That seems pretty harmless.
we're going to make you slaves of the state for a year upon your 18th birthday. And in fact, here's what else we're going to do. Your barcode, your social security number, when it's scanned for your first job, if it doesn't scan up that you were the state's slave for Mayor Pete's whatever he wants to put you to work
if it's
doing.
Mandatory.
Okay. Yeah. He laments that it can't be mandatory, possibly.
Yeah, I don't think we're talking about prison camps, though, Scott.
Tim, it's involuntary servitude. The fact that you get to go home at night, it doesn't matter. What if you don't want to be Mayor Pete's slave, Tim?
It's called.
I don't want to be his slave.
It's called being voluntold.
Voluntold. Ugh.
It's called being voluntold, Scott.
I can't say how. I'm speechless.
National service,
is,
it's a good thing, Scott.
And he talks about, so that's the problem with Trump, by the way, is the lack of national cohesion. And this is going to rebuild it. Can you imagine? I mean, you can see, obviously, right? Look at me. It's just.
You're flushed. You're flushed.
I don't even know how to respond to somebody who says with their opie face, oh, well, we're just going to work towards making sure that all 18-year-olds no longer are free to do what they want. What about the ones that want to, they've got something to do with their life. They don't want to follow Mayor Pete's plan because it benefited Mayor Pete, Tim.
But Scott,
to be in the Army, then that's the right plan for every American.
It's not worth arguing, Scott, because on the left, everything is, as we have said before, and I think this sums it up beautifully, either forbidden or mandatory.
That's where they're headed. Everything has to be one or the other. The room in life for free decisions is just unbelievable. How about Mayor Pete give 18-year-olds some kind of break from the Obamacare tax so that they can have more time in their schedule to go ahead and serve or something like that, right? Like, let's lessen the burden that the state places on people. No, he wants to increase it. Well, this is why I say, Scott, he's not really, in the end, he's not different really than any of these other Democrats running. Maybe on nuance, maybe an issue here or there, maybe different plans for reparations for the descendants of slaves, maybe different degrees of government control over health care. But everything's all headed in the same direction. And the point we're making here, you and me in separate ways, is that this guy Buttigieg, flavor of the month, he's not going to be elected president, let's be honest. Eventually, he's already being attacked for firing a black police chief in Fort Wayne, or in South Bend, I should say. I do know about that,
And he's being called a racist because he dismissed a couple of deputies, I believe, in the police department as well. So, the crosshairs are aimed at him from 17 others. He's not going to survive. He's going to be remembered, I think, somewhat like Michelle Bachmann was, who, remember, she was the hot flavor of the month for Republicans in 2012, and then she faded into obscurity. I suspect that will happen with Buttigieg.
Oh, is it like some Instagram model that somebody's hot for, and then they forget about it, and the next one comes along? All right,
much. Like Beto.
like Beto. All right, we're going to do. So let's just give me a programming note here. I don't have the clip cut. Okay, I want to talk about Bernie just for a second, and I'll tell you what the clip is that we're going to come off of, and we'll just talk about that for a moment, and then right into Biden, and then we're done. Okay.
Okay.
So. Okay, well, let's move along, Tim. And before we get to your I'm going to keep you waiting in the starting gate there for your Biden report as we tease it. And I just want to say, so Bernie was on. He did a Fox News town hall, and even though he made a couple cheap shots, I thought overall it was great. And I want to say unabashedly, it was great that Bernie Sanders went on Fox News.
I agree. Yeah.
Fox News had the class to not load the place up like a CNN town hall where they invite a Republican and then make sure it's all like Hillary Clinton friends and family who's in the audience.
Exactly.
And in fact, I mean, I can play a clip that just shows when Bernie says something, there's lots of cheers from the audience. So it's not typical, but it just goes back to what we talk about with everything mandated or forbidden and the state controlling everything. There's a part where they ask Bernie about the national debt. In fact, they show a picture of the debt clock running up. And this has the sort of applause from Bernie. All he cares about, when you listen to this clip, is taking more money out of the hands of Americans.
What I am saying is that
I'm asking you.
Yeah, we in fact, I am concerned about the debt. That's a legitimate concern. Every American should be concerned about it. That's not something we should be leaving to our kids and our grandchildren. But we pay for what we are proposing. In terms of Medicare for all, we are paying for that by eliminating, as I said before, deductibles and premiums. We're going to save the average family money. When we're paying twice as much as other countries, we're going to save money on healthcare. I talked about a tax on Wall Street speculation that will help us make colleges, public colleges and universities tuition free. We have a tax plan to raise the $1 trillion we need over a 10-year period to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure. So I think you're talking to the wrong guy. We pay for what we are proposing, unlike the President of the United States.
Well, tax and spend Democrats, Scott. They love to tax. They love to spend. But they don't realize that the term tax and spend should mean less taxes and less spending. They just kind of get it wrong.
From your mouth to God's ear. All right. Well, let's turn to, do we have some big news? Do we have any announcements that we want to make? I'll give you the floor, Mr. Tim Donner. Joe Biden for president.
He's running. He's running, Scott. He's running. That's the big news. The Atlantic released an article saying he is running and is going to announce next Wednesday. So Washington is waiting breathlessly so they can morph from talking about obstruction of justice by Trump to how Joe Biden is the wonderful embodiment of all middle American values who's going to take back the country
Scranton,
from
Tim,
Trump.
Good Scranton values. That's his...
Good Scranton values. And as a matter of fact, on that note, what did Joe do this week? He went up to Boston and for some reason felt the call to intervene in the strike taking place at the Stop and Shop supermarkets by the workers there. And now this relates to something else that happened, Scott, because actually the big event.
How have we managed, Tim, to maintain a employer-employee relationship for the better part of a decade without any politicians intervening into negotiations?
It's a miracle,
over
Scott.
compensation?
It's a miracle.
But
But here's the really big news of the week, and I'll tie it to his statement up at the screaming statement up at the Boston Shop and Stop strike, and that is that this is the real momentous occasion of the week that Donald Trump has selected his nickname for Joe Biden.
This is momentous. Hold on.
We already know.
I'm going to insert a drum roll here. All right,
okay,
let's come in after the drum roll has been inserted. The Joe Biden nickname.
The Joe Biden nickname on the heels of crazy Bernie Sanders is Sleepy Joe Biden.
Sleepy Joe Biden.
Sleepy Joe Biden.
It's not a grand slam for me on first hearing. I'll say that.
Not that people on the left only react to Trump, but boy, it sure seemed like Mr. Biden, the former vice president and esteemed senator from Delaware,
immediate past
vice president, heard that nickname and responded with a very caffeinated response at the Boston Shop and Stop strike.
Look, I'm getting so sick and tired of the way everybody's being treated, all American workers, that I've had it up to here like a lot of you have. But look, looking out at this crowd, it looks like my own neighborhood in Scranton and in Claymont. I really mean it.
Yes,
I really mean it. People who bust their neck.
I told you.
People who go out and make a living. People who play by the rules. People who've done everything they're supposed to do.
Eat their Wheaties.
Wall Street bankers and CEOs did not build America. You built America. We built America.
God.
Ordinary middle-class people built America. We used to have everybody who's in on the deal.
So he's not sleepy. It's going to be like low-energy Jeb, and he's going to go out there and try to prove that he's not low-energy.
You point out what will be the most enjoyable thing of the Democrat Party nominating process, which is watching them jump to Trump's, little BB gun shots that he that he sits back and pings at them. When he starts tweeting the debate, the live tweeting the debates, that's going to be like that's appointment viewing there.
Appointment viewing for sure. Even if you don't watch the debate, you don't even have to watch the debate. Just watch Trump's reactions to it on Twitter. It's must see.
So, do you get a sense from your reportage that the creepy Joe Biden part meme is waning enough that he can get past it? Is that the thinking? Or
well, look, Pocahontas got past the most disastrous decision I've seen in years.
You called that disqualifying, if I recall correctly.
Disqualifying on the laugh test.
Right.
I mean, she's already disqualified in my mind on the laugh test. I think he is too. But no, there'll be other people coming because he's at the top of a list of 18 candidates, 17 of whom have an interest in tearing him, ripping him down from his pedestal atop the field. And so there'll be more coming, whether it sticks to him or whether he can turn from creepy Uncle Joe to kind of just little bit over-friendly Uncle Joe who's changing his ways. Again, I think they'll use this statement, Scott, and they should. Frankly, if the other candidates ought to use a statement where he said, I apologize, norms have changed.
Right.
Which basically says that behavior, look, it used to be perfectly fine. But if you want to be all sensitive now, then okay, I'm sorry, I won't do it again.
I remember when I first got out of college and my employers would nuzzle my neck when I was about to give
those Eskimo Eskimo kisses. Oh my God.
Well, just to round out our and I almost called it the vice presidential report like I did to you earlier because of Joe Biden, our presidential decision Decision 2020. I saw that Terry McAuliffe, former Virginia governor and Clinton ally, Terry McAuliffe said that he's out. He actually said he's not going to run.
All these so-called moderates are out. He's out.
Is that
Bloomberg
a response to Biden firmly getting in, do you think? Or
I think he just looks at the math and he looks at the direction of the party, and he's seen as a Clinton ally, which is exactly what he is. He's a Clintonista. The party's moved past that. They want something different and new. His time has come and gone.
Okay, well, let's marry the two topics, impeachment and collusion and obstruction of justice and the decision 2020. Are we going to have a situation where each of those candidates is going to have to make a decision about impeachment soon, and how will that affect their plays? It's going to be like because let me just say this. I think it could be one of these things of like a reparations deal where like it separates the progressives from the normals in terms of like, okay, are you where do you stand on this issue?
I think most of them will defer to House leadership. They'll defer to Speaker Pelosi. They'll defer to Jerry Nadler, to Adam Schiff. I think they'll defer it because they don't want to take a position.
They'll just say
because
Congress has its job and blah, blah,
Congress
blah.
ought to do its job, and if they want impeachment, if they think that's the right thing to do, then I'm behind them. If they don't, then I'm behind them on that too. And that way they can avoid having to take a unique position of their own on impeachment.
Welcome back to the Uprising, Tim. Thanks so much for joining us.
Loved it.
Thank you all for joining us. Remember, 24/7, 365 at LibertyNation.com. We've got conservatarian news and analysis, including The Rabbit Hole, another great podcast produced by Liberty Nation. For your viewing pleasure, please access it wherever finer podcasts are sold. Bye-bye.